You see that? What is that?
The coffee mug sat on the wooden table, still half full. The liquid inside had long since evaporated, leaving a dark ring at the bottom, like a geological marker of time itself. Next to it, a sleeping bag remained rolled with military precision. The door hung open at an odd angle, its outer surface carved with deep vertical grooves, parallel lines that ran from top to bottom, each one approximately 3 inches apart. Perfect spacing, methodical, almost deliberate. But it was the inside of that same door that made the climatologist stop breathing for a moment. More scratches, these ones going upward, as if something had been trying to get out, or perhaps trying to get back in. Before we begin the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We're really curious where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a rating. July 2024. The Thornton Glacier in Yellowstone National Park had been retreating for years, but the summer heat that season was unprecedented. What had been solid ice for nearly 4 decades now dripped steadily into the rocky soil below. A tourist named Marcus Webb, hiking off the designated trail with his drone, captured footage that would trigger one of the strangest cold case reopenings in National Park Service history. At first, the structure looked like debris, a fallen tree perhaps, or abandoned equipment. But when the Park Service helicopter crew got close enough, they recognized the weathered wood for what it was: Ranger Station 12, a backcountry outpost that had been buried under snow and ice since September 1988. The structure should not have existed anymore. According to all records, it had been written off as irretrievable, lost to the elements along with the man who had last been inside it. Special Agent Nora Callahan received the call on a Wednesday morning. She was in her Denver office, reviewing expense reports, when her supervisor forwarded the preliminary photos. Nora studied them in silence, her fingers absently spinning a silver ring that hung from a chain around her neck. The ring caught the fluorescent light as it twisted. She had worn it on her finger once. Now it lived as a pendant, a reminder of promises that had an expiration date. The photos showed remarkable preservation. Ice had acted as a time capsule. The ranger station looked almost habitable, apart from the damaged door and the thick layer of glacial sediment coating every surface. Nora zoomed in on one image. Those scratches on the inside of the door, they bothered her immediately. The angle was wrong, the pattern didn't match the exterior damage. She pulled up the original case file. Ranger Cade McPherson, disappeared September 18, 1988, age 34. Presumed victim of wildlife encounter, body never recovered. Case officially closed in 1992, after 4 years of periodic searches yielded nothing. Nora read slowly, pausing between paragraphs as was her habit, weighing each sentence. Cade McPherson had been a senior ranger, experienced with backcountry protocols. He knew the terrain. He knew the animals, especially the grizzlies. His file noted multiple commendations for wildlife safety training. His last radio check-in had been at 4:47 p.m. on September 18th. Routine status report. Nothing unusual. He was scheduled to rotate out of Station 12 the following morning. He never made the rendezvous. The investigation in 1988 had been thorough, but ultimately inconclusive. Search teams found no trace of McPherson, no blood, no torn clothing, no equipment beyond what was standard issue for the station. The working theory became simple. He had encountered a bear, likely a sow with cubs, and the encounter had gone catastrophically wrong. Grizzlies in that region were known to drag kills away from human structures. A heavy snowstorm hit the area on September 23rd, 5 days after McPherson's last contact. By the time the weather cleared enough for aerial searches, the backcountry was buried under 3 feet of fresh powder. Nora closed the file and opened a new one. Current site assessment. The Park Service had secured the area immediately. No civilians allowed within a quarter-mile radius. The structure itself was unstable. 36 years of ice pressure had warped the frame. A forensic team would need to move carefully. She made the call to her supervisor. She would take the case. 2 days later, Nora was standing outside the ranger station, breathing in the thin mountain air and studying the door that had started all of this. The smell hit her first. Not decomposition, nothing that dramatic. Just old wood, melted ice, and something else. A staleness that came from decades of sealed air finally mixing with the outside world. The door's exterior showed clear evidence of a large animal's aggression. The claw marks were consistent with a grizzly bear, an adult, probably female based on the spacing. The wood had splintered under the force. Several deep gouges went all the way through to the interior. But those marks on the inside, Nora crouched down, careful not to touch anything. These scratches were different, thinner, more erratic. They clustered near the handle mechanism, particularly around the hinges. She pulled out her phone and photographed them from multiple angles. Something metallic glinted in one of the grooves. She made a note to have the lab examine it. The interior of the station was eerily preserved. The sleeping bag sat on a narrow cot against the far wall. A kerosene lamp hung from a ceiling hook, the fuel long since evaporated. The table held that coffee mug, now just a vessel of dust. And there, next to a small two-way radio with a cracked casing, sat a field journal bound in weather-resistant fabric. Nora's team cataloged everything. The journal would go to the lab, but she photographed each page in situ. McPherson's handwriting was neat, economical. Daily logs of weather patterns, wildlife sightings, trail conditions, professional and unremarkable. The entries ended on September 18th. The final notation was at 5:40 p.m. But there was more. Her team found personal effects. A worn Timex watch stopped at 6:02 p.m. A folding knife, a Leatherman multi-tool with a broken blade. And tucked in a corner, wrapped carefully in a plastic bag, a blue bandana. The fabric was faded but still intact. Someone had folded it with care. Nobody mentioned the obvious question at first. Where was the body? A wildlife attack of sufficient violence to breach a secured door should have left evidence. Blood, tissue, something. The interior showed no signs of trauma, no struggle. The furniture remained upright. The sleeping bag was neatly rolled, suggesting McPherson hadn't been sleeping when whatever happened occurred. Nora spent 4 hours at the site that first day. As the afternoon sun angled lower, casting long shadows across the glacier, she noticed something else. Approximately 300 meters down the slope, in a ravine that had only recently become accessible due to ice melt, her team found a shotgun, a Remington 870, standard Ranger issue. The serial number matched McPherson's assigned weapon. It was fully loaded. The safety was engaged. Why would a Ranger, alone in grizzly country, separate himself from his primary defense weapon? The forensic team worked carefully, documenting every item's position before removal. Nora watched them place the shotgun in an evidence bag. She watched them carefully extract the field journal. She watched them photograph the scratches from every conceivable angle. And she kept coming back to that watch, 6:02 p.m. Frozen in time. By the time they helicoptered back to the Park Service Regional Office in Mammoth Hot Springs, word had already spread. The discovery of Ranger Station 12 was making headlines. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets. Within 48 hours, it was national. Ghost cabin emerges from Yellowstone Glacier. Missing Ranger Station found after 36 years. The story had everything: mystery, wilderness, tragedy, and the eerie perfection of that preserved interior. And then, Emma McPherson Wright called. Nora took the call in her temporary office, a borrowed space with a view of the Yellowstone River. The woman on the other end spoke with careful control, each word measured. Emma was 42 now. She had been 6 years old when her father disappeared. She was a wildlife biologist, specializing in large predators. She had spent her entire adult life studying the very animals that had presumably taken her father from her. Emma wanted to see the station. Nora understood that impulse, though procedures said it wasn't advisable. But she also understood that sometimes closure required witnessing. They arranged a supervised visit for the following week. In the meantime, Nora began pulling records. She wanted to understand Cade McPherson beyond the incident report. She found his personnel file, his training certifications, his commendations. She found photographs from Park Service events, a tall man with weathered features and careful eyes. In several photos, he wore a blue bandana around his neck, the same one they'd found in the station. She also found the initial investigation files, multiple interviews with fellow rangers, including McPherson's partner, Thomas Buchanan. Nora noted that Buchanan was still alive, living in Gardner, Montana, just outside the park's north entrance. She added his name to her interview list, but it was another name that caught her attention: Leon Holloway, local hunter, questioned multiple times in 1988. The report said Holloway had been spotted near the park's eastern boundary on September 18th. He claimed he was checking his trap lines, which was technically illegal in that season but rarely prosecuted. The investigators had noted tension between Holloway and McPherson, something about illegal trapping in restricted zones. McPherson had filed complaints. Holloway had, according to one witness, made vague threats. The investigation had cleared Holloway. His timeline checked out, barely. He'd been at a bar in Cody, 40 miles away, on the evening of September 18th. The bartender remembered him. But the timing was tight, and Holloway's story had changed slightly with each retelling, enough to raise eyebrows but not enough to pursue charges. Nora read through the interviews again. Holloway came across as defensive, angry, evasive. He'd had financial problems in 1988. He'd been suspected of selling bear parts on the black market, though nothing was ever proven. And he had a motive, however thin. McPherson had been actively trying to shut down his illegal trapping operation. She made another note. Leon Holloway would need to be interviewed again, if he was still alive. He was. A quick records search showed Holloway still lived in the area, now 61 years old. He had a minor criminal record, poaching violations mostly, but nothing violent. Nora scheduled an interview for the following Friday. The lab results started coming back on Thursday. The watch had stopped due to mechanical failure, likely from impact or water damage that had frozen before causing complete corrosion. The journal's final entry was confirmed, September 18th, 5:40 p.m. Bertha with cubs at eastern slope. Wind shifted. They're heading my way. Need to clear out. Watch is running 12 minutes slow. Damn it. Bertha. Nora cross-referenced the name with park wildlife records from 1988. She found her, Bear 287, a female grizzly known to biologists and rangers as Bertha. The files noted she was particularly aggressive when defending cubs. She had a distinctive scar on her left ear from a territorial fight. Multiple incident reports documented her charging hikers who got too close. She was a known threat. And in September 1988, she had 2 cubs. The pieces seemed to fit. McPherson had seen the bears approaching. He'd noted his watch was running slow, a detail that seemed minor but suggested he was concerned about timing, about getting back to a safe location before dark. The wind had shifted, carrying his scent to the bears. A sow grizzly protecting cubs was one of the most dangerous encounters possible in the wilderness. But if McPherson had seen them coming, why had he ended up at the station? According to the map, Station 12 was approximately 2 miles from the eastern slope where he'd reported seeing Bertha. That wasn't a short distance, but for an experienced ranger in familiar terrain, it was manageable. He should have had time to either retreat to the station safely or take an alternate route entirely. Unless something had gone wrong. Nora studied the topographical maps. The ravine where they'd found the shotgun, it was almost directly between the eastern slope and Station 12. If McPherson had been moving quickly, trying to put distance between himself and the bears, he could have stumbled, dropped the weapon. But the gun had been found with the safety engaged. That suggested it hadn't been in use when it was lost. It suggested McPherson had secured it before it left his possession. That was wrong. Nobody secures their weapon and then drops it while fleeing a bear. Emma McPherson Wright arrived on Monday morning. Nora met her at the helipad. Emma was tall, lean, with her hair in a tight braid that she kept flipping over her shoulder, a nervous habit Nora recognized. She wore field clothes, practical boots, cargo pants, a fleece jacket. She looked like she belonged in the wilderness. The helicopter ride to the glacier site was quiet. Emma stared out the window, her face unreadable. When they landed and approached the station, her composure cracked slightly. She stopped about 10 feet from the door, studying the claw marks. Nora spoke softly. "You don't have to go inside." Emma shook her head. "I do." The interior affected her visibly. She stood in the center of the small room, turning slowly, taking it all in. Her eyes settled on the blue bandana, now in an evidence bag on the table. "I gave him that, for his birthday. I was 5. Her voice was steady but tight. He wore it every day. Nora let her have the moment. Sometimes silence was the most respectful response. Emma moved to the door, crouching where Nora had crouched days earlier. She examined the interior scratches without touching them. "These don't look like bear claws."
"No," Nora agreed. "They don't. What do they look like?" Nora paused, weighed her words, like someone was trying to open a stuck door from the inside. Emma looked up sharply. The door jammed? The hinges were old, according to maintenance records. There were complaints about this station specifically. The door would stick in cold weather. Emma stood, her mind clearly working through something. She walked the perimeter of the room, noting the position of each item. "Where's his field notes?" "At the lab. But we have photographs." Nora pulled out her tablet, showed Emma the images of the journal pages. Emma read the final entry twice. "Watch is running 12 minutes slow." He noted that because time mattered. She looked at Nora. "What time did his watch stop?" 6:02. So actual time was 6:14. Nora nodded slowly, seeing where this was going. Emma continued, her voice gaining confidence as she worked through the logic. "He saw Bertha at 5:40. Called it in. By 6:14, he was here, at the station. That's 34 minutes. From the eastern slope to here, moving fast, maybe 20 to 25 minutes. That leaves almost 10 minutes unaccounted for. Unless he was delayed. Or he was running for his life and took a wrong turn in the dark." Nora made a note to check sunset times for September 18th, 1988. But as they stood in that small room, with the door hanging broken behind them and the evidence of 3 decades slowly revealing itself, Nora couldn't shake one question. If this was a simple wildlife attack, why did so much of it feel wrong? 3 days later, she sat across from Leon Holloway at a diner in Cody, Wyoming. Holloway was gray-haired now, weathered, with a pronounced limp on his left side. He chewed on a toothpick constantly, moving it from one side of his mouth to the other. He wore the same leather jacket he probably wore in 1988, cracked and faded, but clearly a permanent fixture.
"He didn't want to be there. I already told you people everything back then," Holloway said, not meeting Nora's eyes. "I didn't have nothing to do with Cade McPherson." "I'm not accusing you of anything, Mr. Holloway. I'm just trying to understand what happened." "Bear got him. That's what happened. Everyone knows that." "You and Ranger McPherson had some disagreements." Holloway's jaw tightened. "He was doing his job. I was trying to make a living. We butted heads, that's all." "You were seen in the park on September 18th. "I was checking my lines. That ain't a crime." "It is if they're in prohibited zones." Holloway finally looked at her. His eyes were hard. "You gonna arrest me for something I did 36 years ago?" "I'm trying to find out what happened to a missing man." "He's not missing. He's dead. Has been for decades. Now you people dig up his cabin and want to make it a big mystery. There's no mystery. He saw a grizzly. Grizzly killed him." That's the story. That's the only story. But the thing was, as much as Nora wanted it to be that simple, the evidence wasn't cooperating. Because that night, after the interview with Holloway, the lab sent through their analysis of the interior door scratches. Embedded in one of the grooves was a small metallic fragment. Steel. Consistent with a knife blade. Specifically, consistent with the blade from a Leatherman multi-tool. The broken blade of Cade McPherson's knife. He hadn't been clawed from the inside. He'd been trying to open the door with his knife. The fragment changed everything and nothing. Nora stared at the lab report in her hotel room, the reading lamp casting harsh shadows across the technical diagrams. The metallurgy was conclusive. The steel composition matched McPherson's broken Leatherman blade exactly. But what it meant was less clear. A man scratching at his own door from the inside with a knife suggested desperation, yes. But desperation for what? To escape? To enter.
The direction of the scratches still bothered her, upward strokes, as if he'd been trying to pry something open or dislodge something stuck. She pulled out the maintenance records for Station 12 again. 3 complaints filed between 1986 and 1988, all regarding the door mechanism. Hinges binding in cold weather. Door requires excessive force to open. Recommend replacement of entire frame. None of the recommendations had been implemented. Budget constraints, most likely. The Park Service in the 80s operated on a shoestring. Nora made a note and circled it twice. If the door was jammed, why scratch it with a knife instead of forcing it with body weight? What was happening outside that made staying inside worth the effort? The next morning, she drove to Gardner to meet Thomas Buchanan. He lived in a small house on the edge of town, the kind of place that looked like it had been built in the 70s and hadn't been updated since. Buchanan answered the door with a pipe in his hand, unlit. The smell of cherry tobacco clung to him like a signature. He was 68 now, still trim but moving with the careful deliberation of someone managing a chronic condition. His hands trembled slightly as he gestured for Nora to come inside. They sat in a living room cluttered with wildlife photography books and framed Park Service memorabilia. A photograph on the mantel showed 2 men in ranger uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One of them was clearly Buchanan, 30 years younger. The other had to be Cade McPherson. Buchanan caught her looking. That was taken the summer before he disappeared. We'd just finished a week-long backcountry patrol. Good times. His voice carried a weight that decades hadn't lightened. I appreciate you agreeing to talk with me, Mr. Buchanan. Tommy.
And it's about time someone took another look at this. He set the pipe down on a side table, his trembling hands making the motion awkward. I never believed the official story. Not completely. What didn't you believe? The idea that Cade would let himself get caught by a bear. Not Bertha. He knew that animal, tracked her for 3 seasons. He knew her patterns, her territory, her temperament. He was paranoid about her, especially when she had cubs. There's no way he stumbled into her by accident. His last journal entry mentioned seeing her and needing to clear out. Exactly. He saw her. He documented it. He took precautions. That's Cade doing everything right. Tommy reached for the pipe again, just to have something to hold. So what went wrong? That's what I'm trying to determine. Tommy was quiet for a moment, weighing something. Did they tell you about Leon Holloway? I interviewed him. He says he had nothing to do with it.
Leon Holloway is a mean son of a bitch who's been skirting the law his entire life. Him and Cade had real bad blood that summer. Cade found one of Holloway's trap lines in a restricted watershed. Not just regular traps, snares, illegal as hell, and dangerous to anyone who might stumble across them. Cade confiscated the whole line, filed a report with law enforcement. Holloway lost maybe $2,000 in equipment, plus whatever he was catching. Holloway threatened him. Not directly, not in a way you could prosecute. But he told Cade, in front of witnesses at a bar in Cook City, that actions have consequences, and that Cade better watch his back in those woods. I was there. I heard it. Nora made notes. Was this reported to the investigators in 1988? Of course. They questioned Holloway multiple times, but he had an alibi. Said he was at the Grizzly Den bar in Cody the evening Cade disappeared. Bartender backed him up. Case closed. You don't believe the alibi? Tommy's hands tightened around the pipe. I believe Leon Holloway is smart enough to establish an alibi if he's planning something, and I believe that man knew those mountains well enough to get in and out without being seen. Nora let that sit. What about the bear? Is it possible both things are true? That Holloway was involved somehow, but the bear was also present? Bertha was always present. That was her territory. If something violent happened out there, she'd have been drawn to it. Tommy paused. You find Cade's shotgun yet? We did, in a ravine about 300 meters from the station. Loaded? Yes, safety on. Tommy closed his eyes. That's wrong. Everything about that is wrong. Cade wouldn't drop his weapon. He wouldn't engage the safety if he was in immediate danger, and he sure as hell wouldn't separate himself from his only defense against a bear attack. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Nora. Something else happened out there. Something that made him act in ways that don't make sense. After leaving Tommy Buchanan's house, Nora spent the afternoon at the Park Service archives in Mammoth Hot Springs. She requested every incident report, every wildlife encounter, every ranger log from September 1988. The boxes arrived on a cart, musty and poorly organized. She worked through them methodically, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that might have been missed the first time. She found something in a box labeled Miscellaneous Reports, Fall 1988. It was a handwritten note filed by a ranger named Patricia Reeves, dated September 22, 1988, 4 days after McPherson's disappearance. The note documented an unusual finding. Trapline equipment discovered approximately 1 mile northeast of Station 12. The equipment had been recently disturbed, possibly by wildlife. Several traps had been sprung, but were empty. Most notably, one of the snares appeared to have traces of fresh blood, though no animal was found. The note recommended follow-up investigation. There was no indication that follow-up ever happened. The massive snowstorm had hit the next day, and priorities had shifted entirely to search and rescue operations. Nora photographed the note and cross-referenced the location on a topographical map. 1 mile northeast of Station 12. That would put it between the station and the eastern slope, where McPherson had last reported seeing Bertha, directly along a logical route. She called the lab. "I need you to re-examine the shotgun. Specifically, I need to know if there's any trace evidence we missed. Soil samples, plant material, anything that might tell us where that weapon was before it ended up in the ravine." The lab supervisor sounded skeptical. After 36 years under ice, the likelihood of viable trace evidence is minimal. Check anyway.
She also requested a forensic examination of the trapline equipment, if it still existed in evidence. It did, barely. Most of the metal had corroded, but several pieces had been preserved in the dry atmosphere of the evidence storage facility. The blood traces, if they'd ever been properly documented, were long gone, but the traps themselves could tell a story about their placement and purpose. While waiting for those results, Nora drove back to the glacier site. She wanted to walk the terrain between the eastern slope and Station 12. She wanted to understand McPherson's route, his thinking, his timeline. The hike took 40 minutes at a steady pace. At McPherson's presumed speed, running from a bear threat, it might have taken 20 to 25 minutes. The terrain was uneven but manageable. Plenty of trees for cover, multiple routes available. Nothing that would force a person into a single corridor or trap them against a geographic feature. Unless they were trying to avoid something specific. Nora stood at the approximate location where the trap line had been discovered. From here, Station 12 was visible through the trees, maybe 700 meters away. The ravine where the shotgun had been found was off to the left, a natural depression that would be easy to stumble into if you weren't watching your footing. She turned slowly, trying to imagine the scene. McPherson running. From what? The bears were behind him, to the east. He had time. He'd documented that he had time. So why was he running? Her phone buzzed. Text from the lab. Soil samples from shotgun show high iron content, consistent with Mineral Springs area approximately 2 kilometers east of recovery site. Also found trace fibers, synthetic, possibly from rope or cordage. Modern analysis suggests polyester blend, common in commercial trapline equipment 1980s-90s. Nora read the message 3 times. The shotgun hadn't been dropped in the ravine. It had been somewhere else first, near the Mineral Springs, which was exactly where that trap line had been located, and it had been in contact with trap equipment. She called Tommy Buchanan. Did Cade McPherson carry rope or cordage as part of his standard kit? Not usually. We carried paracord sometimes, but that's nylon. Why? I'm trying to understand something. If a ranger found an illegal trap line, what would be the standard procedure? Document it, photograph it at possible, confiscate the equipment, file a report. Would he carry the equipment out immediately? Depends. If it's a lot of gear, you might mark the location and come back with a vehicle or a pack animal. But smaller stuff, yeah, you'd carry it out. Would he disarm the traps first? Tommy was quiet for a moment. Absolutely. Active traps are dangerous. You'd spring them or dismantle them before transport. That's basic safety protocol. Nora thanked him and ended the call. A theory was forming, but it was ugly and complicated. She needed more evidence before she could voice it. The forensic analysis of the door scratches came back 2 days later. The report was detailed and technical, but the conclusion was straightforward. The scratches on the interior of the door were consistent with someone using a blade to attempt to manipulate the hinge mechanism from the inside. The pattern suggested the person was trying to remove or adjust the hinge pins, likely because the door had jammed and wouldn't open normally. The upward strokes were leverage attempts, trying to pry the hinges apart. The report concluded, subject was attempting to exit the structure, but was prevented by mechanical failure of the door mechanism. The damage pattern suggests increasing desperation and force application over a period of several minutes. Several minutes. McPherson had been trapped inside his own station, working frantically to open a jammed door, while something outside made staying inside the only option. Nora requested a meeting with the Yellowstone Wildlife Biology Department. She met with Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in bear behavior who had been working in the park for 15 years. They sat in Chen's office, surrounded by charts of bear population data and territorial maps. "Tell me about grizzly attack patterns," Nora said. "Specifically, when a bear attacks a structure." Chen pulled up several case files on her computer. "It's rare, but not unheard of. Usually happens when there's a food attractant inside, improperly stored meals, garbage, that kind of thing. The bear will test the structure's integrity. If they can breach it, they will." "What about attacks on people who are inside a structure?" "Even rarer. Bears generally don't want to corner themselves inside a confined space. They're opportunistic, but not stupid. If a human is inside a sturdy building, the bear will usually give up and move on." Chen scrolled through more data. "There are exceptions, of course. A bear that's been habituated to human structures, or one that's extremely food-motivated, might persist. And a sow with cubs defending her young will sometimes display atypical aggression." "Like continuing to attack even when the perceived threat has retreated?" "Exactly. The maternal defensive instinct can override normal caution. But even then, once the threat is contained, the bear typically withdraws. So if a person managed to get inside a secure structure and shut the door, they should be safe. In most cases, yes. The bear might scratch at the door, test it, but unless the structure is particularly weak or there's a strong attractant inside, they'll usually leave within a few minutes." Nora showed Chen the photographs of the door damage. This bear didn't leave. Chen studied the images, her expression growing troubled. "These claw marks show sustained effort, multiple strike points, different angles of attack. This bear was very motivated. Either there was something inside that cabin that drew her, or..." She paused. "Or what?" "Or she was already in a heightened state of aggression when she encountered the structure. Something had already triggered her defensive response." Nora felt pieces clicking into place. What would trigger that response besides direct threat to her cubs? Pain, injury, fear. If the bear had been hurt or threatened immediately before this encounter, the aggression could persist for an extended period. Like if she'd been caught in a trap? Chen looked up sharply. A bear in a trap or snare would be extremely dangerous. The pain and panic would make her attack anything in the vicinity. And if she managed to escape the trap but was still injured, that aggression could last for hours. Nora thanked Dr. Chen and left the office with her theory now crystallizing into something coherent. But she needed one more piece. She needed to understand Leon Holloway's movements on September 18, 1988. She spent 2 days tracking down the original investigative reports. The alibi was there, documented multiple times. Holloway had been at the Grizzly Den Bar in Cody, Wyoming, from approximately 6 p.m. until closing at 2 a.m. The bartender, a man named Russell Ford, who had since died, had been certain of the time frame. Holloway had paid his tab at 6:45 p.m. The receipt had been entered into evidence. 6:45 p.m. Nora pulled out her timeline. McPherson's watch had stopped at 6:02 p.m., which was actually 6:14 p.m., accounting for the watch running 12 minutes slow. By 6:45 p.m., Leon Holloway was 40 miles away, with a receipt to prove it. Unless McPherson's watch had stopped earlier, unless something else was wrong with the timeline. She went back to the lab reports on the watch. The mechanism had stopped due to impact and water damage. The report noted that the watch had been submerged in melted ice water for an undetermined period before freezing. Water damage and freezing could preserve the stopped time, but couldn't create it. The watch had stopped at 6:02 on its face, running 12 minutes slow, which meant 6:14 actual time. But what if the watch had been damaged earlier in the day and McPherson simply hadn't noticed? What if it had stopped at 6:02 p.m., but not on September 18th? Nora checked McPherson's journal again. Every entry was dated. Every entry included a timestamp. The last entry, September 18th, 5:40 p.m. Bertha with cubs at Eastern Slope. Wind shifted, they're heading my way. Need to clear out. Watch is running 12 minutes slow, damn it. He'd noted the watch problem at 5:40. That meant at 5:40 p.m., the watch was still running, just running slow. It hadn't stopped yet. So, when it did stop, at the 6:02 mark, that was approximately 6:14 actual time, just as calculated. The timeline held. Holloway's alibi held. Nora sat in her hotel room, frustrated. Everything pointed to a simple, tragic accident. McPherson had encountered Bertha, possibly near an illegal trapline. Maybe he'd been checking the traps, springing them to render them safe. Maybe Bertha had been caught in one, or one of her cubs had. The injured or enraged bear had chased McPherson back to his station. He'd tried to secure himself inside, but the door had jammed. While he struggled with the stuck door, the bear had breached the structure. The attack happened inside. Bertha had dragged the body away, as grizzlies often do with kills. The snowstorm buried the evidence. End of story. Except it didn't feel finished. Something was still missing. Her phone rang. Emma McPherson Wright. "I've been going through my father's personal effects," Emma said, without preamble. "Things my mother kept. I found something you need to see." They met at a coffee shop in Bozeman. Emma brought a small cardboard box, worn at the edges. Inside were letters, photographs, a few newspaper clippings about Yellowstone wildlife. And at the bottom, a small notebook, different from the official field journal. "He kept this separate from his work logs," Emma explained. "It's more personal. Observations, thoughts, sketches. My mother gave it to me years ago. I'd forgotten about it until I started going through everything again." Nora opened the notebook carefully. The handwriting was the same as the field journal, but looser, less formal. She flipped through pages of wildlife sketches. Elk, bison, wolves, and bears. Lots of bears. One page showed a detailed drawing of a grizzly with a notched left ear. Underneath, McPherson had written, "Bertha, 9/12/88. 2 cubs, approximately 8 months old. Marked aggression toward hikers near Specimen Ridge." Charged within 20 yards, but broke off. Classic defensive behavior. Note, avoid eastern quadrant during September. She'll be feeding heavily, preparing for denning. Nora flipped forward. More observations about Bertha. And then, dated September 17th, 1988, one day before McPherson disappeared, an entry that made Nora's breath catch. Found Holloway's trapline again. 3rd time this season. This time he's using snares, prohibited equipment, clearly targeting bears based on placement and height. Confiscated 6 snares, marked location. Will file formal complaint with LE tomorrow. H confronted me at the trailhead, aggressive and threatening. Said I was making a big mistake and that accidents happen in the backcountry. Told him I was documenting everything. He left, but clearly angry. Need to be cautious on tomorrow's patrol. The entry continued with a rough map showing the trapline location. Nora recognized the area. It was exactly where the disturbed traps had been found on September 22. "Did the investigators see this?" Nora asked. "I don't know. My mother gave them his official work journals, but I'm not sure about this one. She might have kept it back. She was pretty protective of his personal effects." Nora photographed every page. This changed things. Not conclusively, but significantly. McPherson had removed Holloway's trapline on September 17th. He documented Holloway's threats, and the next day, McPherson was dead, and new traps were found in the same location, disturbed and bloody. What if Holloway had gone back to reset his traps the evening of September 18th? What if McPherson, on his patrol, had discovered them again? What if there'd been a confrontation? Nothing violent, just an argument, a heated exchange, but it had happened near where Bertha was feeding with her cubs. Bears are attracted to loud human voices. They investigate unusual sounds in their territory. If Bertha had approached during a confrontation, and if she'd been agitated or defensive already. But Holloway had an alibi. He was in Cody by 6 p.m., 40 miles away. Even driving fast, that was a 45-minute trip minimum. If McPherson died around 6:14 p.m., Holloway couldn't have been present. Unless McPherson didn't die at 6:14 p.m. Nora pulled out her phone and called the forensic lab. The watch we recovered from the station, what's the margin of error on the stopped time? Could it have stopped earlier and then been restarted somehow before stopping again? The forensic specialist sounded annoyed. No, mechanical watches don't work that way. Once the mechanism fails, it's failed. The hands stop at the moment of failure. There's no reset. Could freezing temperatures affect the reading? Freezing would preserve the stopped time, not alter it. What you see is what happened. Nora ended the call, no closer to resolution. She drove back to the glacier site one more time, stood at Station 12 in the late afternoon light, the same time of day McPherson would have been there. She traced the route from the eastern slope, walked to where the trapline had been, stood at the ravine where the shotgun had been found. And then she saw it, a detail she'd missed because she hadn't been looking at the right angle. From the trapline location, Station 12 wasn't visible. The terrain dipped and rose in such a way that someone at the traps wouldn't see the station, but they would see the ravine, and anyone running from the traps toward the station would pass directly through that ravine. If McPherson had dropped a shotgun in the ravine, he'd done it while fleeing toward the station. The weapon had been near the traps. The soil samples prove that. So he'd been at the traps with his shotgun, and then he'd run toward the station, dropping the weapon on the way. Why would he drop his weapon while running from a bear? The answer kept coming back. He wouldn't. Unless he wasn't running from a bear. Unless he was running from something else, or toward something else, and the bear came later. Nora's phone buzzed again. Text from the lab. Additional findings from door analysis. Found trace organic material in exterior claw marks. DNA degraded, but consistent with Ursus arctos horribilis. Blood type O positive found in mixture with organic material. Human blood. McPherson's blood. On the outside of the door. Mixed with bear DNA. The attack had happened outside. The door had held initially. But by then McPherson was already injured, and the bear was already in a heightened state of aggression. The bear had continued attacking the door until it failed. And by the time McPherson was frantically trying to escape from inside, working the jammed door with his knife, it was already too late. He wasn't trying to get out. He was trying to get the door open because it had become his coffin. But none of this explained why Leon Holloway's trap equipment had been at the scene, or why McPherson's shotgun had been near those traps, or what had triggered Bertha's attack in the first place. Nora spent that evening reviewing every piece of evidence again, laying it all out in her hotel room. Photographs on the bed, reports on the desk, timeline on the wall. She was missing something, some connection that would make all the pieces fit. At midnight, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Agent Callahan. The voice was rough, aged. This is Leon Holloway. Tommy Buchanan gave me your number. Said you were looking into Cade's death. Mr. Holloway? It's late. I know it's late. I haven't slept right in 36 years. He paused, and she could hear breathing, labored and uneven. I need to tell you something. I didn't kill Cade McPherson. But I'm the reason he's dead. Nora sat up, suddenly alert. I'm listening.
September 18th. I was setting traps. I knew I shouldn't have been there. I knew Cade would be patrolling. I did it anyway. I was stupid and stubborn and broke. His voice cracked. I set 6 snares that afternoon. Good locations, high-traffic game trails. I was checking the last one when I heard something. Big animal, moving fast. I got the hell out of there, didn't even finish securing the snare, just ran. What time was this? Maybe 5:30. I got to my truck by 6, drove straight to Cody, made sure I was seen at the bar. I was scared. If Cade found fresh traps, he'd know it was me. I'd be arrested. I thought having an alibi was smart. You left unsecured traps in the backcountry. I know. God help me, I know. Holloway's breathing was ragged now. I went back 4 days later, after the snow cleared enough. The traps were gone, most of them.
But there was one, the last one I'd set, the one I didn't finish securing. It was sprung. There was blood on it, and fur, brown fur. Nora closed her eyes. Bear fur. I took it apart and threw the pieces in a gorge. I never told anyone. I thought if I just kept quiet, it would go away. But it never went away. Every time I close my eyes, I see that blood. I see that fur. And I know what happened. What happened, Mr. Holloway? Bertha walked into my snare. Got her leg or her shoulder, I don't know. She thrashed free, but she was hurt and scared and angry. And then Cade showed up, doing his patrol, and she was already in full defensive mode. She didn't see a ranger. She saw another threat, and she killed him, because I was too goddamn stupid and greedy to follow the law. The line went quiet, except for Holloway's breathing. Why are you telling me this now? Nora asked softly. Because I'm dying. Cancer. Doctor gives me maybe 3 months. And I'm not going to hell with this still on my conscience. I didn't kill Cade McPherson with my own hands, but I killed him just the same. I need you to know that. I need his daughter to know that. I need everyone to know that some of us don't deserve forgiveness. Holloway hung up before Nora could respond. She sat in the dark hotel room, the phone still in her hand, and felt the case restructure itself around this new information. Not murder, not even negligent homicide technically, just a series of choices made by one careless, desperate man that created the conditions for tragedy. But she still didn't have proof. Holloway's confession filled in the narrative, but it didn't match the physical evidence to Bertha, not conclusively. She needed one more piece. The next morning, she contacted the Yellowstone archives again. I need every record you have on Bear 287, known as Bertha, particularly from fall 1988. The records arrived by email that afternoon. Bertha's file was extensive. She'd been tracked since 1982. Multiple sightings, several incident reports, detailed behavioral notes. And there, in a report dated September 20, 1988, 2 days after McPherson's disappearance, was a notation had stopped Nora cold. Bear 287 observed by aerial survey, eastern quadrant. Animal exhibiting limp on right foreleg, possible injury. Cubs present and healthy. Bear's behavior defensive but mobile. Recommendation, monitor but do not approach. Injury appears non-critical. Bertha had been injured, right foreleg, September 20, 2 days after the incident. The injury had been fresh. Nora called Dr. Chen again. If a bear was caught in a snare on its right foreleg, how long would visible injury persist? Depends on the severity. Minor laceration, maybe a few days. Deeper wound, could be weeks. If there was scarring, potentially permanent. Would the injury make the bear more aggressive? Absolutely. Injured animals are unpredictable and dangerous. They associate humans with pain. They attack preemptively. Nora had her answer. Not the answer anyone wanted, but the truth nonetheless. She scheduled a meeting with Emma McPherson Wright for the following day. They met at the same coffee shop in Bozeman. Nora brought printouts of everything: the timeline, the evidence, Holloway's confession, Bertha's injury report. Emma read through it all in silence. When she finished, she stared out the window for a long time. So my father died because of a trap, an illegal trap, set by a man who was never prosecuted. That's the most likely scenario, yes. And the bear? And the bear. Emma's hands tightened around her coffee cup. I've spent my entire career studying bears, understanding their behavior, advocating for their protection. And one of them killed my father. An injured bear protecting her cubs. She was doing what bears do. I know. Emma's voice was barely audible.
I know that. It doesn't make it hurt less. They sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Emma spoke again. What happens now? I close the case. Officially, death by wildlife encounter, precipitated by unlawful trapping equipment creating dangerous conditions. Leon Holloway is beyond prosecution. He's dying, and even if he weren't, the statute of limitations has long passed. But the record will reflect what happened. Will anyone care? Your father's name will be cleared of any implication that he was careless or negligent. The record will show he died doing his job, confronting an extremely dangerous situation created by someone else's criminal behavior. That's not nothing. Emma nodded slowly. Can I see the station one more time? They arranged it for the following week, but before that visit could happen, the weather changed everything. A massive early-season storm moved through Yellowstone on August 15, 2024. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 6 hours. Heavy snow at the higher elevations. The glacier, already unstable from summer melting, shifted. Station 12, which had survived 36 years of ice, finally collapsed under the weight of new snow and structural fatigue. By the time Nora got the call and arranged for a helicopter, there was nothing left to see. The station had been consumed by the glacier once again, this time permanently. The door with its telltale scratches, the interior with its frozen moment in time, the last physical evidence of Cade McPherson's final minutes, all of it was gone, buried under tons of ice and rock. Emma took the news stoically. Maybe that's how it should be. Let him rest. Nora filed her final report on August 20, 2024. The case of Cade McPherson was officially closed with the following conclusion. Deceased died as a result of a grizzly bear attack on September 18, 1988, at approximately 6:14 p.m. Contributing factors included the presence of illegal snare traps in the vicinity, which injured the bear and created a heightened state of aggression. Deceased acted in accordance with all safety protocols and procedures. No negligence or fault attributed to deceased. Case classification: accidental death due to wildlife encounter under extraordinary circumstances. Leon Holloway died 6 weeks later, on October 2, 2024. He left a written statement confessing to the illegal trap placement, which was entered into the permanent record. His obituary made no mention of the McPherson case. Most people in Cody remembered him, if at all, as a difficult man who'd lived a hard life. Tommy Buchanan read Nora's report in his living room in Gardner, cherry tobacco smoke curling around him. When he finished, he pulled out the photograph from his mantel. Him and Cade, young and alive and laughing. He studied it for a long time before placing it gently back in its place. And somewhere in Yellowstone, in the eastern quadrant where the Thornton Glacier continued its slow retreat, Bear 287's descendants still roamed, unaware that 36 years ago, one of their ancestors had become part of a tragedy that had finally, belatedly, been understood. The file should have stayed closed. Nora had written her report, submitted her findings, and moved on to 3 other cases within a month. The McPherson investigation was officially resolved, cataloged, and archived. But something about it kept pulling at her attention, a loose thread she couldn't quite identify. She found herself reviewing the photographs late at night in her apartment, the silver ring on its chain catching the light as she scrolled through image after image on her laptop. It was Emma who reopened everything. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early November. Nora was reviewing evidence logs for an assault case in Grand Teton when her phone lit up with Emma's name. I found another journal, Emma said without preamble. Not my father's, my mother's. Nora set down her coffee. Your mother kept a journal about the investigation? No, she kept a journal about my father, their life together, and there's something in it you need to see. They met that afternoon at Emma's apartment in Bozeman. The space was what Nora had expected. Field equipment in the corners, wildlife photography on the walls, books about carnivore behavior stacked on every surface. Emma had clearly inherited her father's passion for the wilderness. The journal was a simple spiral-bound notebook, the kind sold in grocery stores. The handwriting was neat, feminine, careful. Emma had marked a page with a yellow sticky note. The entry was dated October 3, 1988, 15 days after Cade McPherson's disappearance. Nora read it silently. The rangers came by again today. They're calling off the active search. They say the snowfall has made it impossible to continue. They say Cade is gone. They don't say dead, but I can see it in their eyes. Tommy Buchanan stayed after the others left. He cried. I've never seen a man cry like that. These deep, silent sobs, like something was being torn out of him. He told me something strange. He said Cade's watch was always running slow. Not 12 minutes slow, more like 5 or 6 minutes. Cade was meticulous about time, Tommy said. He would have adjusted it. The fact that it was 12 minutes slow meant something was wrong with it. Tommy thinks Cade knew the watch was dying, that he'd noted it was running slow and getting slower. Tommy says that matters, but he couldn't explain why. The official rangers told him he was grasping at straws, looking for patterns in randomness. Maybe he is. Maybe we all are. I just want my husband back. Nora read it twice more. Her mind was already racing through implications. Did your mother ever mention this to the investigators? I don't know. I was 6. I don't remember much from that time. Emma pulled her braid over her shoulder, that nervous habit surfacing. But Tommy Buchanan remembered. I called him yesterday, told him what I'd found. He said he's been thinking about that watch for 36 years. What does he think it means? He wants to tell you himself. He's at his house now, waiting for us. They drove to Gardner in Emma's truck, the conversation sparse. Nora's mind was working through the timeline again, restructuring it around this new detail. If the watch had been losing time progressively, and McPherson had noted it was 12 minutes slow at 5:40 p.m., then the question became, how long had it been running slow? Tommy Buchanan met them at the door, pipe in hand but unlit. His tremor seemed worse than the last time Nora had seen him, but his eyes were sharp. They settled in the living room, that same photograph of him and Cade on the mantel, watching over them. I should have pushed this harder in 1988, Tommy began without preamble. But I was grieving, and the official investigation was already leaning toward the bear attack theory, and I didn't have proof of anything, just this feeling that something was off. Tell me about the watch, Nora said. Tommy set the pipe down carefully. Cade was fanatical about time. Had to be. We worked in the backcountry. Coordination was life and death. He checked that Timex against his radio's timestamp every morning, every single morning. If it was off by even 3 minutes, he'd adjust it. So when I heard it was 12 minutes slow when they found it, that told me something. That the watch was failing, Nora said. Right, but more than that. Mechanical watches don't just suddenly jump 12 minutes behind. They lose time gradually, a minute here, a minute there. So if Cade noted it was 12 minutes slow at 5:40 p.m. and he always corrected his watch in the morning, that means it lost 12 minutes over the course of that single day. Nora felt something click into place. That's not a watch running slow. That's a watch that's broken. Exactly. The mechanism was failing catastrophically. And if it was losing time that fast, it could have stopped and restarted, or run erratically. The stopped time we're seeing, 6:02, might not be when he died at all. Emma leaned forward, but the forensic report said mechanical watches can't restart after they stop. They can't restart on their own, Tommy agreed. But if the watch took an impact, the mechanism could seize temporarily and then continue running for a brief period before stopping permanently. It's rare, but it happens with watches that are already damaged. Nora pulled out her tablet and accessed the forensic photos of the watch. She zoomed in on the face,
The stopped hands, the cracked crystal. The report noted water damage and impact trauma. They assumed it happened during the attack. But what if the watch was damaged earlier? Then the stopped time is meaningless, Emma said quietly. We've been building a timeline around a broken clock. Nora stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains. Her mind was reorganizing evidence, discarding the old timeline, building a new one. If we can't trust the watch, what can we trust? The journal, Tommy said immediately. Cade's last entry was at 5:40 p.m. That's documented, dated, in his handwriting. We know he was alive at 5:40, and we know he saw Bertha with cubs moving toward his position. And we know Holloway was at the Grizzly Den bar in Cody by 6 p.m., Nora added. The receipt was timestamped. That's reliable. We also know the sunset time. Emma pulled out her phone and started searching.
September 18th, 1988, sunset in Yellowstone would have been... She scrolled through an astronomical database. 7:18 p.m. Twilight would extend another 30 minutes. Nora turned back to the room. So between 4:40 p.m. and 7:18 p.m., somewhere in that window, Cade McPherson died. The watch stopping at 6:02 is irrelevant. It could have stopped earlier in the day from the impact that damaged it, or it could have failed at any point in the evening. Which means Leon Holloway's alibi isn't as solid as we thought, Tommy said. His hands tightened around the pipe. He could have been at the trap line as late as 5:30, like he confessed. Cade could have confronted him. They could have argued. Holloway could have left in a hurry, made it to Cody by 6, established his alibi, and everything that happened with the bear could have occurred after Holloway was already gone. Or, Emma said slowly, everything could have happened much later than we think.
My father noted seeing Bertha at 5:40, but we don't know when she actually attacked. If the watch is unreliable, the attack could have happened at 6:30, 7 p.m., any time before dark. Nora sat back down, feeling the case crack open again. We need to re-examine the physical evidence without the watch as an anchor point. What do we actually know? She started listing. 1. Cade was at Station 12 sometime in the evening of September 18th. 2. He encountered Bertha, who had an injured right foreleg, consistent with a snare trap. 3. He was attacked, likely outside the station first, and the attack continued as the bear breached the door. 4. His shotgun was found near the trapline location, with trace evidence of trap equipment. 5. He attempted to escape from inside the jammed station using his knife. The shotgun is the key, Tommy said. Why was it near the traps? Because he found the traps, Emma said. He was checking Holloway's trapline location from the day before, found new traps, including the one that injured Bertha. He was in the process of confiscating them when something happened. But his journal entry said he saw Bertha at the eastern slope, Nora countered. The trapline was northeast of the station, not east. What if his watch was wrong even in the journal? Tommy leaned forward despite his tremor. What if, when he wrote 5:40, it was actually 5:50 or 6 p.m.? If the watch was losing time that fast, every timestamp in his journal that day would be off. Nora pulled up the journal photographs on her tablet. She scrolled back through the entries from September 18th. There were 4 entries that day. Morning log at 0800, mid-morning at 10:15, afternoon at 2:30, and the final entry at 5:40. She paused. The morning entry was probably accurate. He would have adjusted the watch in the morning, like you said. But each subsequent entry would be increasingly wrong if the watch was failing. How wrong? Emma asked. If the watch lost 12 minutes between morning adjustment and 5:40 p.m., that's roughly, Nora did the math, 1 minute per hour. So the 10:15 entry would be off by about 2 minutes, the 2:30 entry by about 6 minutes, and the 5:40 entry by about 9 or 10 minutes. So when he wrote 5:40, it was actually closer to 5:50, Tommy said. And when he saw Bertha, she wasn't at the eastern slope, Emma continued the thought. She was already close, maybe at the trapline. Maybe she was already injured and agitated, and my father walked right into a situation that was already critical. Nora stood again, pacing now. Let's reconstruct it. Holloway sets his traps sometime that afternoon, sloppy, rushed, because he knows Cade is patrolling. One of those traps catches Bertha, probably late afternoon, maybe 4 or 5 p.m. She thrashes free, but she's injured and in pain. Her cubs are nearby, which makes her even more defensive. Cade arrives on his evening patrol. Emma picked up the thread. He's checking the location where he confiscated traps the day before. He finds new traps, including the one with blood and fur. He starts to dismantle them, secure them for confiscation. And while he's doing that, Bertha appears, Tommy said. She's already in an aggressive state. She sees a human near her cubs, near the place where she was injured. She charges. Cade drops his shotgun, Nora continued, either in the initial charge or because he stumbles. He runs for Station 12. It's the nearest secure location. He makes it inside, gets the door closed. But the door jams, Emma said quietly, and Bertha doesn't leave. She attacks the door because she's already committed. She's injured, protective, and now she's focused all her aggression on this structure.
Cade realizes he's trapped. Tommy's voice was rough. He tries to fix the door with his knife. The blade breaks. The door won't open. And outside, a 1,000-pound grizzly is systematically destroying the only barrier between them. The room fell silent. The reconstruction hung in the air, vivid and terrible. Finally, Nora spoke. But we still can't prove any of this. Without the watch as a timeline anchor, we're speculating. The forensic evidence is consistent with this scenario, but it's also consistent with a dozen other scenarios. There's one thing we haven't checked, Emma said. She was staring at something on her phone. My father's radio, the one that was found in the station with the cracked casing. What about it? Park Service radios in 1988 were required to log all transmissions, even failed transmissions. Even if he didn't get through, if he tried to call for help, there would be a record on the radio's internal chip. Nora felt her pulse quicken. The evidence log listed the radio as non-functional, damaged beyond repair. Damaged, yes, but the data chip might still be intact. Those chips were designed to survive extreme conditions. They're essentially black boxes. Emma was already pulling up contact information on her phone. I know someone at a data recovery company in Salt Lake City. They specialize in recovering information from damaged electronics. If there's anything on that chip, they can find it. 2 weeks later, Nora received a package via courier. Inside was a USB drive and a printed report from Digital Phoenix Data Recovery. The report was technical and dense, but the summary was clear. They had successfully extracted partial data from the Park Service radio's internal logging chip. Due to corruption from decades of water damage and freezing, most of the data was unrecoverable. However, they had retrieved fragments from September 18, 1988. Nora plugged the USB drive into her laptop. The recovered file contained 3 timestamps and partial transmission data. 17:42:33, outgoing attempt, failed, no carrier signal. 18:23:17, outgoing attempt, failed, no carrier signal. 18:46:09, outgoing attempt, failed, equipment malfunction. Nora stared at the timestamps. 5:42 p.m., 6:23 p.m., 6:46 p.m. 3 attempts to call for help. The last one at 6:46 p.m., nearly an hour after the watch had supposedly stopped. She called Emma immediately. He was alive at 6:46 p.m. We have proof. They conference called Tommy Buchanan. Nora read him the timestamps. 6:46, Tommy repeated. His voice was shaking. Jesus Christ, he was trying to call out for almost an hour. The first attempt was at 4:42, Nora said. That's consistent with your theory about the watch being wrong. He probably wrote the journal entry, saw Bertha, tried to radio in the sighting, and got no signal. The station was in a dead zone for radio, Tommy confirmed. You had to be outside, on higher ground, to transmit. That's standard for those backcountry posts. So he couldn't call for help from inside, Emma said. He was trapped in a building under attack, with no way to communicate, trying desperately to get the radio to work. The 3 of them sat with that image for a moment. Finally, Nora spoke. This changes the legal finding. Leon Holloway was at the Grizzly Den bar at 6 p.m. He paid his tab at 6:45 p.m. But Cade was still alive at 6:46, still trying to call for help. Holloway physically could not have been involved in the attack itself. But he's still responsible, Emma said, her voice hard. His traps created the situation. He admitted that. Whether he was physically present or not, he killed my father. Legally, it's a different question, Nora said carefully. Morally, yes, absolutely. But in terms of criminal prosecution, if he were still alive,
It would be manslaughter at most, possibly negligent homicide. The actual cause of death was the bear attack. His traps were a contributing factor, but they weren't the direct cause. He knew that, Tommy said quietly. That's why he confessed on his deathbed. He knew he was legally protected by statute of limitations, but he needed to admit what he'd done. He needed someone to know. Nora spent the next week writing an amended report. The new timeline was stark. September 18, 1988, revised timeline. Approximately 4 to 5 p.m., Leon Holloway sets illegal snare traps in northeastern quadrant. One trap injures bear 287, Bertha. Holloway flees the area. Approximately 5:30 to 5:40 p.m., Ranger Cade McPherson discovers trap line during patrol, begins confiscating equipment, encounters injured and aggressive Bertha with cubs. Approximately 5:42 p.m., McPherson attempts first radio transmission. No signal. Bear charges. McPherson retreats to Station 12, dropping shotgun during flight. Approximately 5:45 to 6 p.m., McPherson secures himself inside station. Bear attacks exterior. Door sustains damage but initially holds. Approximately 6 to 6:23 p.m., prolonged bear attack on station door. McPherson attempts second radio transmission at 6:23 p.m. No signal. Door mechanism begins to fail. Approximately 6:23 to 6:46 p.m., McPherson attempts to repair jammed door using multi-tool. Blade breaks. Attempts third and final radio transmission at 6:46 p.m. Equipment malfunction, likely due to damaged casing from stress/impact. Approximately 6:46 to 7 p.m., door fails. Fail encounter occurs. Bear removes body from scene. Details of final moments redacted per department policy. The amended report was filed on December 1, 2024. Nora sent copies to Emma and Tommy. She also sent a copy to the Cody Police Department, where it would be added to Leon Holloway's permanent record, a posthumous notation that would follow his name through history. Emma called her the day after receiving the report. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not letting it rest, for finding the truth." "It's what I do," Nora said, but she knew it was more than that. Some cases demanded resolution not for the courts, but for the living, for the people left behind who needed to understand. "There's something else," Emma continued. "I've been going through my father's personal effects, really going through them this time. I found something in a box of his field gear, a letter, addressed to me and my mother. He wrote it in September, before his last patrol." "What did it say?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "It said that if anything ever happened to him out there, he wanted us to know he died doing what he loved, protecting a place that mattered. He said the wilderness isn't malicious, it's just honest. It doesn't lie or pretend. It shows you exactly what it is, and it demands that you respect it." Her voice caught. "He said he hoped I'd grow up to love wild places the way he did, but to always remember that loving something doesn't make it safe." He sounds like he was a good man. He was, and now I finally understand how he died. Not just the events, but the context, the choices that led to it. His choices, Holloway's choices, even the bear's choices, if you can call survival instinct a choice. Emma paused. "I spent my whole adult life studying bears because I needed to understand. And now I do. Bertha wasn't a monster. She was an injured mother protecting her cubs. My father wasn't careless. He was doing his job in an impossible situation. And Holloway wasn't evil. He was just weak and desperate and thoughtless." "That's a lot of understanding for one person to carry," Nora said. "Maybe. But I'd rather carry understanding than hate. Hate just makes the weight heavier." They talked for a few more minutes before ending the call. Nora sat at her desk afterward, spinning that silver ring on its chain. She thought about closure and how it rarely looked like people expected. Justice wasn't always punishment. Sometimes it was just truth, finally brought to light. The following spring, Emma McPherson Wright published a paper in the Journal of Wildlife Management titled Human-Bear Conflict in Yellowstone, a case study of the 1988 McPherson incident. The paper used her father's death as a framework for discussing how human activity, specifically illegal trapping, can create dangerous conditions that lead to fatal wildlife encounters.
It was widely cited in subsequent wildlife management policy discussions. Tommy Buchanan died in his sleep on June 3, 2025, at the age of 69.
His obituary in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle mentioned his 30-year career with the National Park Service and his dedication to wilderness preservation. It also noted that he was survived by no immediate family, but was remembered fondly by colleagues and friends, including the family of Cade McPherson, with whom he had maintained a close friendship until his death. The glacier continued to retreat. By the summer of 2025, the area where Station 12 had stood was completely exposed, just rocks and stunted vegetation, and the memory of something that had been buried for nearly 4 decades. The Park Service installed a small plaque at the site. Ranger Cade McPherson, 1954-1988. He loved these mountains and died protecting them. Nora visited the site once, in August 2025. She stood at the spot where the station had been and tried to imagine that September evening, the fear, the desperation, the sound of claws on wood, and a door slowly failing.
She tried to imagine Cade McPherson, 34 years old, working frantically with a broken knife while darkness fell and the radio refused to transmit, and 1,000 pounds of injured grizzly bear systematically tore apart his only shelter. She stood there for a long time, the wind moving through the pines, and then she left. Some stories didn't need witnesses. They just needed to be remembered accurately. The case file of Cade McPherson was officially closed on December 15, 2024, with the following final notation. Case number 88-YNP-1847. Deceased, Cade Robert McPherson. Cause of death, fatal injuries sustained during grizzly bear attack, precipitated by encounter with injured bear exhibiting defensive aggression. Contributing factors include illegal snare traps placed by Leon R. Holloway, deceased 2024, which injured bear prior to encounter. Mechanical failure of Station 12 door prevented egress and contributed to fatal outcome. Manner of death, accident.
Findings. Deceased acted in accordance with all safety protocols and demonstrated exceptional courage in attempting to survive an extreme wildlife encounter. No negligence attributed to deceased. Illegal trapping activities of third party created dangerous conditions that directly led to fatal encounter. Status: closed, resolved. And somewhere in Yellowstone's eastern quadrant, in the territory that had once belonged to Bear 287, her descendants continued to live and hunt and raise their cubs, unaware that one of their ancestors had become part of a tragedy that took 36 years to fully understand. The wilderness remained honest, demanding respect, showing exactly what it was to anyone willing to look long enough to see the truth.